Welcome to Unleash Your Inner Goldilocks, how to get it just right. Thank you so much for joining us for another exciting and insightful conversation. One always wonders, what is the right way to identify leadership and bring the right leadership into the organization? And what type of leadership is going to make an impact right now for where the organization is and where it needs to go? And that is precisely the question we're going to address in today's conversation. How do we get interim leadership just right so that the transition and the transformation the organization needs to have is coordinated in the perfectly relevant way to get to the next level? And to have this conversation with me is Karma Israelsen, somebody I have known for years and somebody I have worked with. And you are going to be blown away from the insights and the nuggets of wisdom you're going to get from Karma. Karma, welcome to Unleash Your Inner Goldilocks.
Hi, good morning. Good morning, everyone.
Lovely to have you here. As we get started, let's take a step back and talk about what brought you into the world of leadership and how did you land on the need to assess and understand and rightfully position interim leadership on an as-needed basis?
Yeah, great question. Good morning, Cass. Thank you so much for having me. I sort of fell into interim leadership on accident. I had been serving as the board chair for a healthcare organization, and our CEO had resigned very abruptly. And at that time, I was transitioning between companies, and I had some time and availability to step in and for what at the time was supposed to be a 3-month period to really give the board time to identify a permanent leader. And it became fairly obvious early on that the amount of work that was needed to really stabilize the organization was going to require more time than just a 3-month period. It was also during the time when the Affordable Care Act was being implemented. So there was a lot of noise in the external environment, and a lot during that time, people just trying to understand what affordable care meant and how we needed to implement it for our clients. So with the support of the board, and I give them a lot of credit, we went through a fairly intensive process with the search firm that we had hired to really take a step back and look at what the organization needed, not only for the interim transitional period to get through this change, both internally and with being able to address the pressures that were happening externally, but really to think critically and strategically about the skill set that the incoming executive would need to have to really help the organization grow and go on to meet the goals of strategic plan. And so what was interesting about that engagement, again, like I was a first-time CEO. I'm sure I made every mistake that you could possibly make as the first-time CEO. But what I learned from that experience is really the power that leveraging an interim position can have in an organization, particularly during times of transition or times of growth or times of any sort of strategic pivot, that using that interim leader can really position the incoming leader for success. So I joke all the time that my job was to do the dirty work, right? There was a lot of restructuring that we had to do. There was a lot of transition just in terms of financial stability and financial shoring up the organization that we had to do. And it really, I think, set the organization up for a very different experience for the incoming executive, where they could come in with a solid foundation and not have to confront the internal pressures, the external pressures, the environmental pressures. They could come in and really be able to then execute on the plan that the board had set forth.
So that's a very visual picture you're painting based on the way events transpired. Now, leadership is part the person and how the person is influencing, and the other part is what they're able to create as impact for the organization. So talk to us a little bit about what about you set you up for success in that interim role, and how did you learn and grow? What about you transformed in this process of interim leadership as you helped transform the organization? Because I want to come to the organization second.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I think that I've been very grateful and fortunate in my career to have really strong mentors and people that have helped me along the way. So first and foremost, I think that as a leader, it's really important to ask for help. It's really important to be self-reflective and sort of continually look at how you're being effective. Are there ways that you can improve? Are there blind spots that you have? And being able to have those resources throughout my career has been really valuable for me. I came from a background. I grew up in a very poor family and in a very rural community. And there was this idea that, like, if there was something that needed to get done, you stepped in and you got it done. So that's sort of been my philosophy throughout my career, that I believe that um, my role as a leader is to give people the tools and resources to do their jobs and then get out of their way. And at the same time, if there's something that needs to get done, then as a team and as a leader, we need to step in and get it done. So just from a personal philosophy, that's how I've approached my sort of leadership journey. I believe strongly and passionately in the power of mentoring and developing emerging talent. I think that so oftentimes, particularly the higher you get up in an organization, pardon me, it's really easy to get disconnected from the people that are actually doing the work, that are serving your clients or that are serving your customers or that are involved in the day to day. And oftentimes I found like the best ideas come from like the front desk receptionist or come from someone in the maintenance team, where they're seeing this in a different perspective, in a different way. And so engaging in those conversations and managing by walking around. I'm a huge believer in managing by walking around. It really keeps you in touch with the organization. It keeps you in touch with your clients and your stakeholders, and it also allows you to generate ideas from the bottom up, and really be able to have the insight that's directly the insight from the people that are having the most direct relationship with your clients. From just a personal perspective, I think that I've been hopefully grateful to have learned from mistakes that I've made, and I've made many in my career. I've had a lot of career success, but I've also had some career less career success, and I work hard to be really reflective of what did I learn, what worked, what didn't work, what do I need to focus on moving forward. I think I'm going through an exercise right now that's really awkward for me because I'm a bit of an introvert, of getting feedback from peers and colleagues that I've worked with to understand, like, what did I do well? What could I have done more effectively? What are things that I maybe should focus on in the future? And as hard as that is, and as difficult as it is to get that feedback, it's been incredibly insightful and very rewarding. And I sort of knew this, that you'd be surprised by the number of people that actually want to help you. You just have to ask and put yourself out there.
So that is very insightful in a variety of ways, right? Walking around and talking to people and making yourself available and be seen, and giving the other people the opportunity to be heard, right? That is a huge part of influencing change and getting people on the same page. So I love to hear you say that. And a lot of times, traditionally established organizational leaders are not comfortable doing that. And masculine leadership doesn't do that. Feminine leadership is a little more open to doing that. So there are a lot of nuances in that. What advice would you have for folks who think that would be like fraternizing, or that is getting too close to what's going on and I need to maintain my distance? So a lot of times the power distance is confused with the power of influence.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that I I I'm an operations person. I love having my hands in everything that's going on. I also like to understand what's happening. I like to understand the current state of any organization that I go into, because until you understand the current state, it's often really, really difficult, if not impossible, to be able to know how to move forward. Obviously, as a leader, you want to maintain like appropriate professional boundaries and all of those things, and really keep it focused on the business. And so for me, the idea of managing by working around and being connected to the business helps me be more effective as a leader. It helps me understand, um, you know, people make an organization work. Like people are the heart and the sort of like the breath that drives an organization. And so understanding people, understanding the culture, both current state and the state that you want to build and evolve, is vital. As an effective leader that's driving a business, I don't know how you are successful without understanding and really getting deeply involved in those two things. And when I think about culture and people, you can pick up on so many things just by having a quick conversation and checking in with someone. Like, how are you? How was your weekend? How are the kids or the four-legged children? Tell me about something that you did that inspired you this week. There's a lot that you can pick up in a pretty quick way by just asking simple questions. And I think a lot about the organizations that I've worked for and the culture of those organizations and how we thought about the values that were important to us as an organization. And each of those organizations were very different. The values were very different. The culture that we were looking to inspire was very different. And so understanding what's important to your team, and then understanding what's important to your stakeholders, obviously, and being able to marry those two in a really thoughtful and intentional way is really how you start, at least in my experience, can drive some significant cultural change and significant impact, obviously, to the bottom line, because you've got people aligned, you've got everyone in agreement with what it is that you value, what it is that's important to you, and that's when you start seeing that pivot and that change in terms of impact.
Brilliant. And as you're talking, I'm listening to you introduce the concept of culture and the importance of culture. A lot of organizations forget that. And the old adage, right? Your organizational culture is going to eat your strategy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, right? Yep. That is the fundamental principle of establishing the right culture so that you can drive the strategy. What, from your experience, are 2 or 3 critical elements that allow the organization to establish the right culture, and as needed, modify that culture as the organization evolves and the society around it evolves?
Yeah. How much time do we have? Like, I can talk about this topic for like literally days. So, let me try and answer your question succinctly in the time that we have. Because there's a lot of focus on this space right now, on culture, on DEI activities, and rightly so. It's important. And what I find oftentimes in having wonderful and dear friends and colleagues in this space that do a lot of culture work and DEI work is, unfortunately, in many cases, it's treated as a checkbox, like a checklist item. Like, okay, we hired a DEI person, therefore diversity, inclusion, and equity is fixed, and culture is fine. Like, we're good. And in my experience, where the actual work comes in, first of all, you have to have executive level support. You have to have your C-suite, particularly your CEO, on board, and they need to understand what this actually means. And for me, what culture means is sitting down with your stakeholders and with your team and clearly identifying what those values are, because it's different for every organization. I think diversity and inclusion and equity can be defined in so many different ways, depending on the culture of the organization, depending on your team, depending on the clients that you serve, depending on the part of the country or the globe that you're in. And so simply defining diversity as this, what we would think of generally here in the US as, race, gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation. There's so many other ways of thinking about diversity that until you sit down and define those values and what those core things are that you want to protect in the culture, doing DEI work is, again, a checkbox item. And so for the work that I've done that's brought me the most joy and been the most impactful, is sitting down with cross-functional employee groups and having them actually lead the discussion about what do you value, what is important for you, like what is it the soul of this organization that you really value, and what is it that we need to protect. And for the organizations where I've done this work, those things looked very, very different. And that's great because the organizations were different, the makeup of the team was different, the clients that we served were different. And so I think doing that foundational work is often overlooked. So once you have that established and can clearly and succinctly articulate what it is that you value for your organization, what it is that you value and want to protect in your culture, then you do the work in terms of changing your operational processes, right? So if you value XYZ thing, you need to look at, where are you recruiting? Are you recruiting in channels that actually would have those aspects or those attributes available to you? You have to look at how you're onboarding your new employees. Like, is your training and your onboarding and your processes aligned with those things that you say you value? You have to think deeply about how you are doing team meetings. Like, are you incorporating, just like things that often get overlooked because you have your way of doing things, and that's just how this is supposed to look. And so I have many examples that I don't think have time to go into right now, but you have to start first with defining what it is that you want to do and what's important to you. And from there, then you start doing the work of aligning your internal processes, procedures, operations, marketing to reflect that work. And I think it's hard. It's hard. It takes time. I think my first organization, it took our team probably a year to define what we meant by DEI, and took probably that long as well to define what the values were that we wanted to really protect within the organization. But it's a really deep, rewarding, and worthwhile activity that I think, in order to actually start making that change and have it be sustainable, it's the work that needs to be done versus just hiring insert person here to fix like equity, inclusion, and culture at the organization.
I'm sitting here smiling as you're talking, because being able to see that in various organizations done the wrong way, and too often the C-suite brings in an outside consultant or outside consulting team to do some work for 2 or 3 months, and at the end of it, they are recommending what the culture should be, right? They are recommending the employees have, maybe some of the employees had input to it, but it has not been organically established through the organization. And then what we run into is somebody else said, this is who we are. And then the organization resists it because employees don't see themselves that way, and that is not what they want. And so now we have on paper one thing, in reality another, and then it calls into question, you use the word soul of the organization, the authenticity with which we go to market is compromised.
Yeah, and I think it's something that I 100% agree. And it's something that is, it's something that's deeply personal to employees, right? It's something that they really, like my team at all of the organizations that I've done this work at, it's something that they're passionate about. It's something that they are really interested in. It's something that they really want to contribute to. And yes, it's outside of their sort of job that they get paid for, but they're really passionate about it. And they want to feel pride in where they work. They want to feel joy when they go to work. They want to feel like it's a place that represents all, like as humans, we're all multifaceted. And so they want to work, at least in my experience, want to work for an organization that reflects the diversity of however they define it. They want to work for an organization that reflects that, and they'll actually do way more than you would expect to actually move this work forward. And it's a great way to build trust. It's a great way to build morale. It's a great way to build camaraderie across the team. It's really impactful in terms of providing opportunities for personal and professional growth, right? There's not another soapbox is professional development for emerging leaders, but it's a way. It doesn't cost you anything to engage your employees. It doesn't cost you anything. Maybe you have to buy some pizza, or maybe you have to buy coffee and bagels in the morning, but being able, like, engaging your team to actually drive the change that they want to see, it's such a simple investment, and when facilitated well, can make a really transformative impact on an organization, and you don't have to hire a bunch of consultants to come in and do it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the difference is, don't just make it a place of transactions where people come there and it's just a job. You've got to get them connected. We got to get the entire organization functioning like a well-oiled machine with emotionally vested, because that's where they're spending most of their waking hours. And how they are made to feel here goes home with them. It affects the home life. So that is such an important, even from a human behavior perspective, it is such an important element. I love hearing you say that. The other thing that's coming up for me is, a lot of times the diversity of thought and diversity of perspective, diversity of solutioning is overlooked. If we recruit from Ivy League schools, if we recruit from specific zip codes that are similar, it doesn't matter the gender difference, the skin color difference, the age difference, the mindset can be the same. And a lot of innovative transformational opportunities for the organization are lost. The psychological safety creation is lost when we don't make sure to intentionally embody that diversity from various dimensions.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think that again, I'm grateful, particularly here in the US, that we're talking about these things. And I agree completely with your point. There's a lot of ways that you can think about diversity. And one thing that's like, I will never be the smartest person in the room. And I'm fine with that, because I want to learn from other people that are smarter than I am, that have a different perspective, that have a different experience than I do. And I want to be able to, like, I focus on making sure I'm asking the right questions. So I had someone on my team several years ago be like, "You sound like a 2-year-old." You're like, why? And I think it's really important. I think asking the right questions and being able to provide the space for people to do that solutioning is critical. And I don't remember who told me this in my career, but it's generally the quietest person in the room that usually has really good ideas. And I think that resonates with me, because I'm an introvert and I'm generally really quiet, but I process information really quickly. And so being able to create an environment where you do have diversity of thought, of experience, of educational background, of sort of lived experience, is so vital, because you lose a level of depth and richness by having like similar thoughts, right? Like, if you look at companies that get in trouble, it's because everyone thought the same and got on the same boat, and no one questioned anything, and no one actually thought differently about anything. And so being able to have that lens, and having a diversity as broadly defined as you could possibly define in this conversation, I think brings, and there's obviously a lot of studies that have been done about having like women on your board and other sort of diversity elements. I think the research is very clear on that is beneficial. But to your point, like, why aren't more companies hiring students out of historically Black colleges and universities? Why aren't people hiring why isn't someone hiring someone, particularly with remote work? Like, is there someone in Nebraska that could provide a really valuable insight and perspective? So those sorts of things, I think, again, going through the work of defining what diversity means for your organization can really, really enrich and deepen the outcomes and the impact that you're going to have.
Absolutely. Before I open this up for conversation with our live audience, Karma, can you take a moment and share with folks what's the best way for them to get a hold of you if they want to talk to you, get your advice on setting up interim leadership, setting up culture? What is the right approach to go through DEI transformation?
Yeah, absolutely. I will put in chat my LinkedIn information and my email so that everyone has that. And obviously, Cass is amazing, so she knows how to get a hold of me. But I will drop all of that in chat right now so that people have that. And again, like I think it's interim leadership is I'm a big fan, obviously, because it gives a lot of space for the board and for the organizations to really take a step back and do that critical work about what actually needs to happen to position the organization for future growth. And then I think based off the conversation here, I can obviously talk about culture and DEI for days and days and days at a time. So I'm always happy to do that. Always happy to do that.
Thank you, Karma. Yes, Robin.
Okay, so this is very near and dear to my heart as well as it is to Cass's. The the culture of the organization, leadership, all of that. And as you have expressed, I am a firm believer that unless the people who hold the purse strings of an organization buy into the notion of culture, buy into the notion of meaning, buy into the notion that, yeah, the secretary might have a good idea, the janitor might have a good idea, how can we bring them into the conversation? Then this systemic change that you're discussing can't happen. And so what have been, obviously pointing to the bottom line, and gobs of research that the bottom line shows that in involving people in this way makes a difference in the bottom line. But what have you found to be some of the more effective or powerful ways to get, the CEO, the CFO, the accounts receivable people, getting, the treasurers, getting the people who hold the purse strings or deal with the purse strings on board with the notion of corporate culture and bringing in voices and who are we?
Yeah, that's a great question. Fortunately, I've been in charge of a lot of organizations, so it was easy. But I will say this: I had a really interesting conversation a couple of weeks ago with a woman who does a lot of work with chief HR officers around this particular topic, and how are you influencing the C-suite, particularly the CEO and the CFO, to to invest in this work. And I think you hit the nail on the head. Like and my teams will tell you this, whenever they would come to me with an idea, my first question was like, what's the ROI and what's the bottom line? So I think being able to have HR business partners or other people in the organization that can really talk to and outline from a financial perspective the positive impact that this can have. But I think that's first and foremost, for at least for my experience as CEO and COO, I always went to the financials first. And if you could make a compelling argument about the financials, then I was like, all right, we can let's continue the conversation. The second thing that I will say, so having an HR partner, an HR business partner, or a chief diversity and equity inclusion partner that understands how to translate this culture DEI stuff, which is often seen as like warm and fuzzy, being able to translate that to financials, I think is really, really important. Secondly, I would say that it's understanding, and maybe this is where you bring in an outside consultant to do this, really getting the executive team aligned on the reputational benefit this can have, on the operational benefit this can have, on the financial benefit this can have, could be something that would be impactful to be able to do. Because oftentimes, and I think this is particularly true for organizations that maybe don't have a lot of diversity at the C-suite level or at the board level. And I'm certainly not suggesting that there aren't sophisticated, smart leaders out there that don't look like the three of us on this call, that aren't like intelligent leaders. But understanding the perspectives of employees and understanding maybe that disconnect between the perception of what the C-suite thinks and what employees and stakeholders think, doing that needs assessment, I think, is really important, because it's, for most of the C-suite executives I have known and worked with in my career, having data can be a really helpful tool in terms of being able to influence. Again, you have to have that influencing piece there. You have to be able to make a compelling argument, but being able to show clearly, whether it's through your employee engagement surveys or through your turnover numbers, whether it's through your vacancy numbers, there's a lot of different metrics that you can look at that would point to a compelling need to do this work. And like, not to be controversial on a Saturday morning, there's some companies that are maybe just going to mismatch with your values. And that's, again, as a person of privilege, it's easy to sit here and say, if you don't like what your company is doing, you can leave your job. And there is a reality that some organizations, they're just not in this point from a cultural evolution to be able to move forward with this work. And that's okay. Like that's okay. So I think there's a variety of ways that you can come at it, but being able to incorporate data, particularly financial data, and understand what the costs are to not investing in this work is, in my experience, a great way to at least move the conversation forward.
Yeah, that's a great answer.
What a wonderful question, Robin. And I love the way you incorporated the financial and non-financial elements, Karma. And ultimately, it is about the financial and non-financial, right? The opportunity cost and the financial cost. The cost of doing something may sometimes be outweighed by the cost of not doing something. You know, the old saying, if you are too worried about the cost you have to invest in training your people, imagine the cost of having an uneducated, untrained workforce. Can you afford it? Yeah, right? Yeah. And so looking at the opportunity cost is equally important as looking at the cost of the ROI. And so I love where this conversation is going. But we are also at a point where the conversation is coming to an end. So any closing thought that you have, a nugget of wisdom, a takeaway for our audience as they start thinking about their organization or how they want to impact their organization's culture and transformation as the world around us is changing?
Yeah, and again, thank you for having me. This is a great way to start a weekend morning. I think for me, as someone who has a really high tolerance for risk and ambiguity, which my financial planner doesn't really like, there's a lot of ways to get from point A to point B. And I think what oftentimes happens is there's a lot of noise in the environment, and you're seeing all these like sexy, trendy new things that, whether it's Meta or Microsoft or other tech companies are doing, that oftentimes organizations will latch onto as like, this is the path forward, this is what we need to do. And in more cases than not, that's not the case, because your culture or your team or your leadership isn't ready, or maybe doesn't have the skills to be able to do that. And I'm thinking first and foremost about, there was this move several years ago to go to unlimited paid time off, which again, in theory is great. And I've worked for organizations that have had that. But when one of my organizations that I was at, we had rolled this out as an idea to our team, and we had a lot of first-time emerging leaders and first-time managers, and they weren't sure how to actually administer this policy. So even though they thought the policy was great, they were first-time leaders and didn't understand that you can actually say no to people if they request time off. And if your entire team has requested time off, then you can say no to things. And so I think it's a simple example of how really understanding where your organization is, understanding where your leadership team is, understanding what the needs are of your mid-level managers, and understanding what is going to work best for your culture is far more important than just because someone in Harvard Business Review or Inc. or Fast Company made this recommendation. those are great, and there's great ideas out there and people that are doing really innovative and creative things. And if you have a culture and leaders and emerging professionals that maybe don't have the same level of experience or the same level of background, it's actually more damaging to roll some of these things out than not. So really would encourage people to look closely and carefully at their current state of their culture. What is the culture that they want to develop and move to? And then what are those steps? This takes time. This is not something that you do in a quarter and like everything is magically fixed and off you go. So while it's important to stay educated on what the market's doing, it's important to stay educated on current research, on current topics, those sorts of things. This idea that you can just copy and paste something that another organization did, I think can cause a lot of damage in the long run. And it's ultimately not going to get you the outcomes or the results that you were hoping for.
That is good food for thought and a good cautionary reminder, because, just because you see a beautiful fish swimming, you can't do the same, because if you're not a fish, you can't swim, right? Einstein's notion of, if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it's going to live its whole life thinking it's dumb. Right? So it has to be relevant, it has to be applicable, and it has to be meaningful for the environment. So thank you so much for that nugget of wisdom. And to our audience, continuously evaluate what your family culture, your organizational culture, the entity you're a part of, how is that working? How can you bring some value to it? And in that process of bringing value to it, how can you influence where the organization is going, and how can you be a part of the change? Every person making that conscious effort to step into their brilliance and contributing is where a lasting, sustainable, and meaningful culture is built. And that is what we hope to see in organizations around us.